I'm back to actually start on my colourwork section now of my Darkwater Sweater. So last time I was filming for this, I think I showed you how I've completed the increases and everything so far. I just realised I don't have a stitch marker. I'm gonna quickly go get a stitch marker because apparently I'm not prepared. Didn't even have to go that far. I'll explain it. So I bought an advent calendar from Lucy Locketland, but I had too much, well, I was worried I was going to have too much luggage going to Dubai. So I decided to take some bits out and was like, Nina, be honest with yourself, how much knitting are you actually going to be able to get done in the 5 or 6 weeks that I was there? So sadly, I had to take out one of the advent calendars, and it had to be, well, I had Georgie's advent calendar and I had Lucy's advent calendar, and sadly I had to make the choice to leave Lucy's behind. Even though it is smaller, so maybe I should have brought it, but I wouldn't have had a chance to work on it. I didn't even really have a chance to work on my Fibre Fox one. So I finally sorted it last night because I've been finishing projects, so I want to pick it up because I've started it. But I hadn't opened all the doors of it yet because I haven't had time. But there were stitch markers and things included, and I sorted all of that and I put them on the corner there. And so I didn't actually have to leave the room. So this is just the one I'm going to use because it didn't look too big or heavy. Because somehow, whichever one I was using has kind of slipped off. So I am on to the colourwork section. It is currently Monday, the 8th of February. So still early in the Knit Love Wool Cal. My brain. If you've watched my latest episode, you will notice that, hey, this this setup looks exactly the same, and you've even still got the book up. Yeah, I stopped filming, took a bit of a break, and now I was like, you know what, everything is set up. And normally I wouldn't film this in here, it'd be in my sofa like the first section you saw. But the washing machine is running, which you might be able to hear. And I was like, if everything's already here, why don't I just knit here? I'm just gonna have to move some things because I can't see the full colourwork pattern. Now I can. I don't know how much you can hear of the clicking and stuff. Sorry if you can. But yeah, so I'm up to the colourwork section, and also compared to my usual setup, you're a bit further back so you can see a bit more of what I'm doing. Now obviously this is not a tutorial that I'm doing, it's just me kind of chatting and talking through how I kind of do colourwork and stuff now that I've done it a bit. But this is my first colourwork sweater. So you can notice probably straight away, I knit using both fingers, but not the way that most people do, where, you know what, I'm actually going to start knitting and talking at the same time. So I'm just introducing my contrast colour now. So I just kind of try to hold it in place a bit, but I'll tug on that again later. But most people kind of just hold it between their fingers. I have to wrap. I don't know how else to do it. And then even though I'm a continental knitter, I've had to kind of learn how to wrap. Not wrap, throw. What am I saying? I'm just counting how many stitches of each colour I need to do. This first section I think is actually quite easy. Oh yeah. Now I hopefully shouldn't have to look again. So now I need to knit with my contrast again. So I just always try to, even with my main colour, I always try to just fan the stitches out a bit. Don't even know if you can see that. But I've made those socks that I absolutely despise, the Gryffindor ones, and that was knit with merino, so I was a bit nervous doing this. How's that gonna work out if my last merino colourwork project wasn't great? But I don't know what it was about that yarn. It was just so slippy, and then I also think the DPNs I was using, they were the Knit Pro ones. Oh, is it Zing? Where they're coloured. for different sizes. And they're just so slippery. Like, these aren't very grippy. They're also Knit Pro. I think also the Zing, but interchangeable, not DPN, obviously. And I think because the other ones were DPNs, it was just really hard to keep the tension, especially in the corner. This also feels a bit weird because normally I don't knit so upright. I kind of normally have my work like lying down, but I guess I could grab a pillow or something. This is why I typically knit on the sofa, because then my legs are a bit like towards me because I slouch, which is not healthy. So maybe this is actually better for my back. As I mentioned a while ago, I really kind of messed up my back a bit. Not really anything I did, it was just a random muscle spasm, but ended up in the hospital because I got stuck just outside of kind of like York. I'd gone for a bike ride and got absolutely stuck because I couldn't move, and I was just on the ground next to a roundabout and people were stopping like, are you okay? And I was like, please just move along. I don't want you to look at me. And I knew they couldn't do anything, and I didn't think it was urgent enough for an ambulance, but then the police kind of stopped by and were like, we're going to call an ambulance for you. And they were really lovely and took me to the hospital, which I also didn't want because I was like, COVID. It's like the worst thing, going to the hospital right now. But it was all good. The doctor was crappy. He was just like, yeah, just walk it off. And I was like, well, I can now that you've pumped me full of, I was about to say alcohol, full of drugs and, you know, delicious painkillers for when you're in pain. But he was all like, just take paracetamol and ibuprofen. And I was like, you're kidding, right? But luckily I have a wonderful GP who, when he got up the next morning, checked. Apparently they get like notifications when one of their patients has been in the hospital. I did not know this. And so he called me and checked up on me. He was like, I've just seen you've been in the hospital yesterday. Like, how are you doing? Because I was discharged the same day. Like, I wasn't even really admitted, I guess. And he was like, look, we're going to get you some painkillers. I'll send the prescription through. Can someone collect it for you? And I was like, not really, with lockdown and everything happening. But maybe I can get Boots to deliver. But I think actually the first time I got medication, a friend of mine did pick it up. Because I think that wasn't in like a lockdown. It was just like social distancing and try not to be around people if you can. But, and since then, like that was really, I think like June, July. And I still have moments when I work and sit a lot that my back really hurts and I can just feel it and I have to be careful. It just gets aggravated really easily now. But it's definitely better because I went to see a physiotherapist. No, a chiropractor. What am I talking about? Went to see a chiropractor who's quite close to me, and he was just absolutely amazing. Like, I had to pay for my sessions, but worth every penny. Because otherwise, I couldn't knit. Because I just couldn't really sit. So I tried it in bed, but don't know if you've ever... Depending on what you knit in bed and how you knit, it can be okay. But I actually find it really uncomfortable. Because I have to... It's not just like sitting in bed. I have to like almost lie flat. And that's very uncomfortable. So... But as you can hopefully see, I'm lucky that the whole way around currently for this row, it's the same repeat. So I just have to occasionally check that I've got enough stitches of my main colour. But currently it's really easy. And occasionally I just have to, you know, rewrap my finger. And ideally what I want to do is not lift my whole hand. I'm still learning this. But just actually flick around. Still didn't do it. My yarn has to be at the perfect length. This is why most people don't wrap. They just kind of, you know, do this thing. But most people just kind of, from what I've seen, like do this. I have no strength here to hold the yarn. I'm just going to slide right through. So I've just decided I'm still going to wrap even for the throwing. I keep wanting to call it flicking. How did you see it there? That's what I want to do ideally. Not actually let go. I'm about to do it though because my thread's getting too long. It's only when it's a certain... My yarn. It's only when my yarn gets to a certain length, or is at a certain length, that I can actually throw like that. But I can do either, it's fine. I just know that it's more comfortable and I don't have to keep, you know, catching my needle. But yeah, so far, this is quite easy. There'll be increases later, but to be honest, I never really believed people when they said colour work isn't that hard until I did it. And then I was like, well, if you can knit, why wouldn't you be able to do colour work? It's just the tension. But you can literally sort that out. Like, the easiest way to do colour work if you're nervous, one, I recommend starting with thicker yarn. So if you have watched my most recent episode, I talked about a sweater I'm test knitting for Sophie, the Knit Pearl Girl on Instagram, called the Colourwork Sweater. And that one's done Aran weight on, the body's knit on 6mm, and that's where you do the colour work. So some people do knit quite tight, so they go for a bigger size. I do not knit quite tight colour work. I think because I spent so much time on my tension. So at the start I was actually quite loose, and now I've kind of settled into it. But by starting with thicker yarn, it's just, especially with that pattern as well, I'd really recommend it as a beginner pattern, as long as you're relatively comfortable with knitting top-down sweaters, because you don't want to do two new things at once. You can. It's just, I know that can be a bit overwhelming if you're already quite nervous about colour work. But it's a 4-stitch pattern repeat. So what that means is you don't have to catch your floats for that pattern at all, because you typically would only catch floats after like the 5th stitch or something. I typically catch my floats more than I think I should. So this currently is 5 stitches in the main colour, 1 in the contrast, and I'm not catching my floats, and it feels very uncomfortable. I like catching them every 3. But the problem if you catch your floats quite often, and especially if it's not really necessary, is the next round you have to be careful about where you catch your floats, because you don't want them to stack. So you don't want to catch a float over the same stitch, because then your floats start to pop through more, because you've got that colour almost like piling up. So then you have to start worrying about alternating where you catch your floats, which can then be a bit annoying, unless you kind of, you know, are good at constantly keeping it regular about where you catch your floats. But then it depends on the pattern that you're knitting. So there is obviously more to consider with colour work than just, you know, when you knit a normal jumper. But that's also in some ways what makes it fun. But that's why I think it's important to start with something easier. I definitely didn't go for the easiest thing. I did do a fingering weight project. It was those wristies from Lucy Locketland. Can you tell I also really love, you know, the stuff she sells? It's absolutely amazing. And some of her patterns as well. And she designed that. The reason that one was quite easy was because it was Shetland wool, which is quite grippy. And the Colourwork Sweater, if you knit it in the right yarn, like I'm using the petite wool by We Are Knitters, that one's quite good. Sorry that I'm looking down all the time. I'm not too good or comfortable yet with colour work to not look down, because I get nervous. But I'm using the petite wool, and that's a Peruvian Highland wool, which is unspun. And because it's unspun, and also because I'm pretty sure it's not superwash, it's a relatively grippy yarn. And that's what makes it easier. Because then, I mentioned this in one of my videos before, but it literally just means that you don't have to, like I said, worry too much about your tension anymore, because your stitches are stickier. So as you're knitting, you know, like your main colour, for example, those stitches, once you've worked them, stick to each other. And if you have to pull much harder on the yarn to get them to like tighten up. And that's exactly what makes it easier, because you don't have to worry too much about how hard are you pulling your yarn. Because I do have a bit of a tendency to try and, because I'm used to knitting continental, but when you knit the way I'm currently knitting, your contrast color should always be in your left hand. It's to do with color dominance, which I had to learn about that, but you don't really need to understand it. You just need to know contrast color should be in your left. Doesn't have to be. It's just, it helps with whatever you're knitting to look a bit better. It makes the contrast color pop, which is what you want typically. And so sometimes my floats aren't as big as they could be because, or, you know, not as loose and floppy as they could be, because that is my normal knitting hand. So I'm quite good at not worrying about my tension with it, but that means it's my usual tension of how I knit, which can be a bit firm. Or tight, I guess, not really firm. Oh no, that contrast colour stitch was almost the same colour as my main colour. 2, 3, 4, 5. I knew that would be an issue with this one, but I was okay with it because my contrast colour has some... You gotta focus. It's got some darker bits in it. And so, because I've only currently got one stitch of it, then my main colour just literally, like, it blends in with it. Focus back on me, please. There we go. I figured that out if you've seen my latest video. I'm gonna keep saying that. I have to, like, to get my camera to focus sometimes I have to, like, move around a lot. But yeah, so if you start with a heavier weight of yarn, hang on, wait, yeah, I am up to my contrast colour. No, that one was also much darker. Oh. If you knit with a heavier weight yarn and you use, I would say non-superwash ideally if you're starting. You don't have to, like I said, it's just my suggestions if you're a bit nervous about it. Thicker yarn, aka thicker needles as well. Grippier yarn, so typically non-superwash. If you can get unspun, though sometimes unspun can be hard to work with. But like I said, the petite wool, We Are Knitters, really good. You don't have to start with a small project. I did in case I really struggled and just couldn't handle it. Luckily, I loved it and I breezed through those the first wrist warmer, then I went away. But I breezed through that first one so quickly. So pick a project you really like, because I think that's going to help. If you're doing something just to kind of test it, this is the thing. I'm going to get into my sort of next topic now. I mentioned this in my latest episode. I'm never going to stop saying that I'm really looking into steeking because I want to try it. I feel really comfortable with colourwork now, and now I make colourwork cardigans. That's where it's at. And I'm not even trying to get into steeking for the sake of colourwork cardigans. I'm trying to get into steeking because I want to know what it's like. I feel like there's something always satisfying about just cutting into something you've knit. Though, I had that with those awful socks. And I did not. Well, I guess I did enjoy cutting into them, though I cried. Because it was just a bit therapeutic. Just cutting it away, being like, screw you, you've caused me problems. Oh, my hair's everywhere again. Wait a second. Okay. Recommendation number, I think it's 3, and potentially my last one when it comes to colourwork. Don't multitask when you're doing the first row. I made 2 mistakes. Instead of knitting 5 stitches, I did 4. So by the time I got to the end of the row, I was like, why am I 2 stitches off? Have I learnt? Have I finished the first row and then I'll talk to you? No. No. I preach to you the things you should not do, but I do them myself. That's how it is, isn't it? I'm just going to try and check back more frequently because I had to rip, well, you can see I had to rip back all the way to here. You can see where my beginning of round marker is. Idiot. Absolute idiot. Once you've got the first row set up, it's fine, because then you've always got, like, not necessarily safety nets, but like little markers of the colourwork below. But for the first row, that doesn't exist yet. You've just got the main colour. It tells you nothing. So, Don't do what I do. What was I talking about? Steeking, wasn't it? I don't know why I got so fascinated by it. I've always been like, when I first heard of it, I was like, what is this now? What is this term? I have never heard of this term. How is it that knitting can still teach me new things? Pardon me. I thought I knew everything. Oh, young innocent Nina. And I'm pretty sure it was my friend Helena who first told me. I think I'd heard of it and was just like, this is something, I don't know what it is, whatever. And then she was like, you knit colourwork in the round and you cut it open. I was like, what? Or just knit in the round in general. It doesn't even have to be for colourwork. It's just often used for colourwork. Because there seems to be a hatred for working the wrong side of colourwork. Now, I've done it. Which is interesting because I'm saying, like, this is my first colourwork sweater. But I do consider this to be my first colourwork sweater because the other one I've done, it wasn't really colourwork. I had some, like, yarn left over. I think it was either Aran or bulky, so thick. And I just wanted to use it for something. And I didn't know what. I just had so many random skeins of random colours and just one, sometimes maybe two skeins if I was lucky. Like with the petite wool that I'm now using for my colour burst sweater. And so I kind of just looked at the colours. I was like, well, they work together quite well. So why don't I just, somehow work them together? And so it's just like this striped bottom-up jumper. I haven't finished it yet. Once I have, I'll share it off. Share it off, show it off. And the reason it's colourwork, but not really, is that for a couple of the rounds for each stripe, you just knit one stitch in a different colour and it creates like this like just little cute little stitch, and it's just cute. But so you have floats obviously, but it doesn't really feel like colourwork. But with the way that I designed it and the shoulders that I wanted, like, I shouldn't say design, there wasn't much designing involved. I needed to work the front and the back separately because I didn't know how else to do it. So I think the other option would have been to steek it, but only for sleeves and neckband. And I didn't even, I think, consider that. Once again, I did not know that much about steeking when I started that. It's only really the weekend that's just been where I've really gotten into like looking it up, being like, how does it work? What's the difference between securing it with crochet and sewing machine? Other than, one's with a crochet hook and one's with a sewing machine. I was like, how does it work? I want to learn more. But yeah, so I just did that one flat. It was fine. But that's because unlike what I'm knitting right now and a lot of the other colour work, it really is just such a simple repeat pattern. So I guess I get it, but at the same time, maybe I wouldn't want to do it with fingering weight yarn and maybe not with a complex pattern, but I didn't think it was too hard. I thought it was actually quite enjoyable. But yeah, so with steeking, something I'm also trying to figure out is patterns will obviously say like cast on this many stitches, these will be your steeked stitches, where all you do is alternate the colours across those steeked stitches to secure the yarn. But I'm looking into a project which has 3 different colours in it. Well, actually 4 different colours, but you actually knit with 3 colours at one time in one of the rounds. I think a few of the rounds actually. And so then the question is, if you still only have like 5 or 6 steek stitches, alternating 3 colours across that, they're not going to be as secure as when you're alternating 2 colours. So if it's not as secure, like if you're using grippy yarn, I guess you'll be okay, especially if you sew it down. Because I can imagine sewing it down would be much more secure than crocheting it, unless you're like, especially if you're using superwash yarn, or if you're using, I guess, multiple, like 3 colors or more. Is there more? I guess you could do more. Because, sorry, just checking back to make sure I haven't made a mistake again. Think we're okay. I'm going to finish one thought before I continue with the other. Because with sewing, you can have quite short stitches, and with crochet, your litch is going into the stitches that you already have. So I can understand why it would be more secure. But what I wanted to say was, so I had to rip back that first row. Not all of it, but most of it, like 75% of it. And I think that's another thing, like, don't be embarrassed by that. Like, mistakes happen, and like they would with, if you've done any lace knitting. And with lace knitting, depending on where I made the mistake and how far back I have to go, I find it's much harder to go back and fix a mistake with lace than it is with colourwork. Because colourwork, at least a lot of the stuff I've done, it's typically just knitting every stitch. You're just alternating colours. Whereas with lace, you've got the yarn overs and then decreases, and going back, if you drop a yarn over and you've missed that, it's just not fun. So like the Taha Moana shawl that I've shared in, I think even my first video, but I don't know if it was actually done then, by Aroha Knits. I kept mispronouncing her name. I don't know how I screwed that up, considering I lived in New Zealand for so long. Embarrassing, but I learned. I made mistakes in that lace. I did not go back because I didn't realise until I was like 2 rows in already. And then I was like, and in a few of the lace sections, I'm like, whatever. That's part of things being handmade. I'm not a machine. I'm not going to get things absolutely perfect. And I don't really want to. But with colourwork, it's easier. I've had it before that I've made a mistake in the round before, and I didn't notice until I got back to that point. And sometimes it is doable to fix mistakes the way I would normally, of just dropping that stitch down until my mistake and then working it back up correctly. But depending on the mistake that you made, sometimes it will really start to kind of like pull and pucker your work because the tension is now off because you're changing stitches. So if you accidentally, worked one in the wrong colour and the other one wrong as well, that's easy. You just, both of them are still going to be worked. But if you meant to, pardon me, knit like 3 stitches in a colour and you did it with the other one, you have to go back. Or if it's quite far down, leave it. So what if there's a mistake? Sometimes people are like, hopefully, those kind of mistakes will be on the back. I'm like, even if they're not, like, even some stuff that's, ooh, my whole apartment is shaking because my washing machine is spinning. Don't know if you can hear it. But even if, like things you buy like in clothing stores, you can often see mistakes in there too. Sorry, I'm on the next view. What? Boring. Aw, there's nothing, there's no colour work for the next 2 rows. Oh, I'm so upset. Oh well. I feel like I shouldn't be giving away. You won't figure it out. Go buy the pattern. Don't be naughty and try and copy it. I haven't told you the stitch count or anything, so we're good. At least it means I should be able to look up a bit more. And that's another thing, obviously, just a general thing. I often go back and just tug on my tails a bit. Not too tightly, because then you'll, depending on how grippy your yarn is, you'll then pull stitches further down, which is not ideal. Oh, I feel like I've been all over the place with this. And I feel like I've come on for 1 round of colour work and then like, bye! Or just, like, now we're just back to knitting in 1 colour. So you would have noticed I had to switch hands because I'm not going to keep throwing. It's too slow. I don't like it. I think I've also talked about this before. I wrap way too much yarn around my finger because I'm lazy. Like sometimes it's, if you noticed, once I started working again after unraveling, I unravel onto my finger, so I literally like reverse like what I do when I knit. And So it means I wrap more and more yarn on my finger, which then means it gets really thick. And really what I should do is, once I've unraveled to where I need to, is, you know, take the yarn off my finger and wrap it up again normally. No. I'll work from what's on my finger. Thank you very much. I have the same problem with any sort of like hand sewing or Kitchener stitch or seaming things together, that, well, I guess it's mainly just seaming things together, because with Kitchener stitch you do just need one piece. You don't want multiple pieces to seam that together. But I always have a really long thread, because I'm like, I'm not going to do this twice. I'm not going to have more ends to deal with. I will do this in one go, no matter how long it is. And there's a saying that my mum always says to me, in German, which goes, langes Fädchen, faules Mädchen, which translated, if you don't speak German, is roughly something along the lines of like, long thread, lazy girl. Oh, but it's more like, you know, it shows that you're a lazy girl, and I'm like, I'll take it. I am definitely the person who, you know, will try and carry things from A to B in one trip. Does not need to be two. And my brother's typically the same as well. So that's always quite nice. Because we understand each other. Like, so I think I've mentioned before, he lives down in Perth in Australia. I feel like I have to add the Australia bit, because now I'm, you know, in the UK. A lot of the places that I sometimes mention have the same, like, from Australia and New Zealand. They also exist here. So he's in Australia. I went to, when I used to live in New Zealand, I visited him, I think twice it was, and stayed with him and his now fiance. And I think we went like grocery shopping at one point and maybe bought some other stuff, and we both knew, when everything that's in the car, one trip. We will do it in one trip. And I don't care if I'm bleeding afterwards because I've got so many bags ripping into my skin. Oh, my washing machine's done. How nice. I will suffer for it. That was completely random. I wasn't going to talk about that at all. I'm probably going to stop chatting soon, because I don't think you want to watch me just knit normally. You might just not want to watch me at all, but then you're probably already gone. But I will just say, I've been getting so into knitting podcasts. Like, I already watch them occasionally, but typically if I'm watching something when I knit, I'd put on like Netflix, or sometimes I guess I watch Amazon Prime or Disney Plus, all of those things. And just put something mindless on. But with knitting podcasts, it's like a double whammy of knitting. So as I'm knitting something beautiful, I've already got like thousands of ideas of what else I could knit. And I'm also introduced to more like yarn dyers, different designers, and then also just different crafters that I then follow on Instagram. So my Ravelry favorites have blown up. I have so many now, it's insane. And I've mentioned a few of my favorites before, but I asked on my Instagram stories, like, who's everyone's favorite? God, pardon me again. And a lot of people mentioned the Grocery Girls. I watched a bit and it was nice. It's just, I don't know. I feel like with a lot of things, when it's two people doing it right now, because we can't, you know, actually be together, it's a bit hard because it has to be, you know, done via Zoom or just kind of a web chat. Not a web chat, a video chat. And so you have that as well with just interviews in general, that people, you know, like call in, and I already have so much video call conferencing stuff in my life, not just with work and meetings, but also with, you know, talking to my family. And that's something I've done since I started studying in New Zealand with my bachelor's and my parents moved away. So since I was pretty much like 18, I have relied heavily on the internet to communicate with people. Now with the pandemic, I have to do that even more. And I don't then also need that with my podcast. So I'm not saying it's not a bad podcast at all. They're really both lovely people. And I will watch them. It's just I can't get into them as much as those ones where it's just, you know, someone sitting at home or whatever. And it's just really one person. Or even, you know, more than one person, but they're in the same space together. Which I feel really crappy about saying. But it is the truth. I've mentioned Fiber Tales before. Love her podcast. If she, like, did a video every day, I'd be on that. I love how she talks, how she just kind of expresses herself and the things she knits with, and she's just amazing. Their knitting traditions, I've also mentioned before, love that one as well. Because, I don't know, once again, you know, she's from Norway, and they just have different yarn, and I feel like different knitting traditions, obviously, because I think every country has their own, like with most things. And so especially those two often, like, introduce me to, like, patterns and wool that I never would have thought about working with. Like I shared in my most recent video about the Plötterlopi. I still have some of the stuff here. I have not cleaned up, clearly. I don't think I would have ever bought that. I think I would have never really got into more rustic yarn. Like, I love my hand-dyed stuff, do not get me wrong, and I'm not stopping buying that. It's just, I'm starting to be interested a lot more in stuff that is a bit, you know, superwash isn't great. There are better ways of, there are some superwash methods I've heard that aren't as bad for, like, the environment and stuff as others. So, but I don't know which one's better and who uses what with what yarn. But also, I don't know, the more I read about superwash, the more I was like, wait, you're actually getting rid of something that makes wool. And even, like, my superwash hand-dyed stuff, I don't chuck that in the washing machine. My bought knitwear, I typically do put in the washing machine on the wool cycle. Unless it's, I have, I think, 1 or 2 pieces of knitwear that are quite expensive. Those I'm like, hand wash. Because I'm like, that's expensive money-wise. And the stuff I knit, even, you know, like this here I mentioned was used, I used drops yarn. So I think in total the sweater cost me maybe £30, not including the time. Because then it would be really expensive. But the actual, like, yarn for it, I think cost me £30 roughly, maybe even less than that. And I held mohair double, so, like, I used a lot of yarn for this. So drops is really cheap, but I spent a lot of time on this. So I'm not just going to chuck this in the washing machine either, because this piece is time expensive. And then with the hand-dyed stuff, of course, you've got expensive because the yarn's relatively expensive because a lot of work goes into it. So once again, time expensive, so therefore money expensive. So then my sweaters are time and money expensive. And so I just want to, you know, give them the kind of love they deserve, and I don't want to do something, you know, hand washing isn't that bad. Now, if I get an actual stain, like a proper stain that's hard to remove, I can understand why you might want to wash it, like, in the washing machine, but it's kind of, for me, a last resort. And also, it's just, yes, those longer fibres, like in the Plötterlopi I just showed you, apparently that's what makes a wool sort of feel itchy and uncomfortable. But I think you can get used to it. Just like, I remember when I started knitting and I was like, oh, this yarn is so soft, this is so soft, this isn't soft, I don't want to knit with that. But then when I bought the wristies from Lucy Locketland, and I absolutely fell in love with them, and I was like, okay, it's relatively scratchy. That's what I thought. I don't anymore. I was like, oh, it's not the softest yarn, it's quite scratchy. But I was like, oh, whatever, it's just going, like, on my wrists when I'm outside or if I'm working from home. If I'm working from home, I'm always working from home. But if I get cold while working from home, hello to my leg. Then, what was I saying? I got distracted by my own leg. I was like, oh, it'll be fine. I don't care if it feels scratchy. It will probably be itchy. I was like, and it's a small piece anyway. But as I was working with it, I found I really got used to it. And that's what I'm starting to notice now. Right. Obviously, at one point I was working with 100% cashmere. So that's anything you knit with after that, unless it's more 100% cashmere, is going to not feel very soft. So all of a sudden, all the merino I had, where I was like, so nice. My plumpy, that I have from the Fiber Fox, where I always went, oh, this is even more amazing than merino. It felt scratchy because I was comparing it to 100% cashmere. So one, it's comparing superwash to non-superwash yarn. Non-superwash yarn is always going to feel scratchier. And then longer fibers, that makes it feel scratchier as well. But some people do have actual problems and they can't work with that yarn. They can't knit with it, work with it. They can't wear it. I'm not one of these people. I don't have sensitive skin. I've never had any sort of allergies or reactions really to things. So I'm like, why am I not knitting with it? And it's also a whole different experience. Love it. And now that I'm about to get to a colourwork round, I'm actually going to take a break because I need to hang up my washing. But to be honest, it's not that exciting. I'll knit a bit because I hate ending just before a row. I just hate ending before it's done. Oh, my hair is on this. Of course it is. But I'd rather end... Yeah, I've done two. I'd rather end into a row than right before finishing one, because then I'm so close to the finish line. And see, now I don't even need to count. Now I just need to see where's my other white stitch. Plonk another one down. Nina, stop. But colourwork's so much fun. And this is the thing, if you're scared of colourwork, trust me, you're gonna get addicted. Unless you do those socks that I made using the yarn and the needles I did, and it's awful. But yeah, I guess I'll show it to you, but trust me, it's not exciting right now. Because, my ring light's probably turned up too high. Come on! There we go. So, you can just see the single stitches, because that's the only colourwork so far that I've done for this. It should... Oh yeah, it starts to get more exciting really soon. I've just got some increases and stuff coming up first. It's interesting, when I first looked at this pattern, I was terrified. Because I bought this quite a while ago. So I looked at it and was like, no way, I can't do this, this is so hard. And now I'm looking at it going, oh, wish it was a bit more complex. But it'll be a nice relaxing knit. Never thought I'd say that about colourwork. The last thing I'll say before I hang up my washing. I do find that I knit a bit slower with colourwork, and I find that really therapeutic to kind of, with my normal kind of knitting, like with the Colourburst sweater now where I'm up to the body, I don't knit very fast, but I knit relatively fast. And it just kind of means that you're pushing, and with colourwork I have to slow down compared to my normal knitting. So that then means, my knitting is still very therapeutic and mindful, because that's how I got into it really, because I needed that in my life. But with the colourwork, it's just sort of taking a step back, slowing down a bit more, and I really love that. And with 3 colours, I slow down even more. Anyway, I will check in again at some point. I'm not sure when like I said, I think I'll release a couple of videos for this. But you will see it at some point soon. And then more will come in the future. Because this has to be done... When does the cal end? April, I think. Has to be done before then. Anyway, talk to you again soon.